I want to welcome every member and fellow to this particular session. And as you have noticed, from one session to another, we have different topics, and what it really means, for us in the humanities is that we are covering almost everything that has to do with mankind and with society and so forth. So I want to welcome you to this session. The topic for today, as you may already have known, is the changing nature of academic and intellectual freedom in Africa. And the presenter is Professor Adebayo Olukoshi of the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa. Professor Olukoshi is a renowned scholar with special interests in the areas of international relations, governance, and human rights. He has served in many capacities, among them Director of Research of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NIA, and Executive Secretary of CODESRIA, based in Senegal. Professor Olukoshi is already in the house. Please kindly make your presentation. Professor Albert, how many minutes do we have for the presentation?
30 minutes, sir. 30 minutes, sir.
30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, Professor Olukoshi, you have 30 minutes to make your presentation. Thank you very much. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Chair of the session, Professor Sogolo. It's good to see you again after so many years. The last time was on the corridors of your office at the UI campus when I came visiting colleagues during my days at the Institute of International Affairs. Yes, and I would also like to thank the president of the academy, as well as the rest of the leadership, and indeed also Professor Albert, who helped to organize this, including pinning me down repeatedly.
Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation.
No, it's a great honor. It's a great honor, and I'm really delighted to be able to do this. It's quite a big topic, but it's also one that is extremely relevant to us at this time. At the time when we started our conversation, I don't think we imagined that many of the developments around the freedom of the academy and of the intellectual, which we are witnessing around the world today, would be unfolding in such a dramatic manner, as we have seen, for example, in the United States, of all places, some people might say, but perhaps not completely shocking to everybody, as we've seen with the Trump administration and the battles that are going on with particularly the university system, and the attempts also to dismantle not only long-standing policies of inclusion, openness, and participation, but also the entire Department of Education in that country. But even before the arrival of Trump back into office, we had seen episodes of attacks on the freedom of campus life, so to speak, unfolding in the US on the back of the war that is taking place between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. You'd recall scenes of police being brought in to disperse demonstrators on campuses across the US, and indeed also in Europe, most notably, I would say Germany and France are outstanding in this regard. of basic things like the right to assemble and to protest on campus, not even outside of campus, being met with the most vicious of repressive measures. And in a sense, the arrival of Trump has simply carried this process of repression of rights and freedoms within the academy one step further, including the deregistration of students, expulsions, and not only from the university, but also through the cancellation of visas and deportation. As of the last count, people are talking of anything up to 1,500 international students who have been asked simply to leave the United States on account of either views they have expressed on the administration or for their participation in demonstrations demanding international action to stop the genocide that is going on in the Gaza Strip. So in a sense, we have a very interesting backdrop, which forms part of a changed context within which academic freedom and intellectual freedom are being played out presently. But perhaps we should take a step back and look at Africa in the period following independence, doing so on the assumption that the quintessential African university is actually a post-independence creation, with the exception of Ibadan, Legon, Makerere, and a few others in Egypt, and I think perhaps Fort Hare University. Most of the universities on the African continent in the period between 1960 and the 1990s are actually established in the post-independence period. And all of them, almost without exception, were established as public institutions that constituted part of the state and nation building agenda of the post-independence period. And in a sense, on account of the coalition of forces that delivered independence to most African countries, the relationship between the university and the state in the early years of the independent period appeared to be organic and benign. An understanding that the university had an important role to play at a minimum in the production of the human resources required to administer the newly independent countries in a season of Africanization of the public services, especially the civil service, state-owned enterprises, as well as even propelling the emergent or nascent private sector, not to talk of the broader goal of national liberation and how to consolidate the independence that had been won and the role which knowledge-producing institutions could play in helping to leapfrog the underdeveloped state of most countries at independence in order to enable them to achieve the structural transformation that constituted part of the independence agenda of the struggle for independence. But this alliance was quite short-lived in many respects. It was short-lived to the extent to which some of the basic political premises on the basis of which independence was achieved began to be eroded. Some just a few years after the arrival of independence, and we can probably begin to periodize this or date this from the moment when the movement towards single-party rule began to gather momentum across the continent. The arguments in support of single-party rule centered around the necessity to mobilize all national energies and resources in order to prosecute on a more accelerated basis the task of national development, but also with the goal to avoiding what was perceived to be the divisive nature of partisan multi-party politics, and therefore to have a unified political system that would help to drive the nation building or national unity agenda. Recall the slogan of the time: one nation, one destiny, under one God, usually with one leader. And that leader invariably, in several cases, became a life presidency, which also grew in authoritarianism as the years went by. Authoritarianism, as well as the inter-ethnic contradictions that were embedded in the single-party regime that resulted in the onset of military rule, a military coup d'etat in many African countries in the course, excuse me, in the course of the 1960s into the 1970s. And that change in the context of the post-independence African period, post-independence African developmental trajectory was itself to signal the contradictions that were associated with a highly statist approach to both the project of nation building and developmental transformation. The assumption that both national unity and development could only be constituted from above by the state, and that the state itself had more or less the monopoly of wisdom on what needed to be done in order to achieve the desired goals of unity and transformation. As can be expected, the academy became the site both of debate, but also of resistance to the single party and military regimes that emerged. And that began the process of attack on the freedom of scholars on the continent. Perhaps on our side in Nigeria, we didn't see the worst sides of these attacks, but I recall, and as I prepared this presentation, I went back to the story of the Kenyan minister, a very bulky man-mountain of a person, 6-footer, and huge as in his construction, minister in the government of Jomo Kenyatta, who was reported to have called a press conference in Nairobi after a demonstration by the students of the University of Nairobi against the general situation in the country. To invite, the minister decided to call a press conference to invite Karl Marx to a physical combat, largely because the placards which the students carried had inscriptions and quotations from Karl Marx. And his assumption was that Karl Marx was a Kenyan, and that this was a person who was being paid by the government, an employee of the government, causing so much disruption in the university system. And his own way of dealing with the problem was simply to say that he was inviting Karl Marx to a direct combat, which he was sure that he was going to win. But even in the more respected countries where single party rule or military rule were the order of the day, places like Tanzania, for example, under Julius Nyerere, the tension between the academy and the political leadership, the post-independence political elite, had also become palpable, almost to the point where Julius Nyerere, again out of irritation on the basis of the criticisms that were made of his Ujamaa policy by academics of the university, was to basically dismiss them as armchair theoreticians who should remain confined to the campuses of their universities. And for as long as they did not go out of the university campus, he was comfortable with them. But every attempt to carry debates on policy and politics outside of the universities, including student demonstrations, were met with repressions which were not repressive measures, which were not in any way different from what was seen in places like Kenya, or indeed even in places like Uganda, that were some of the most tough sites of confrontation between the university and the political leadership. Of course, in the context of our own country, Nigeria, we had moved into military rule from 1966, and the relationship, I'm sure Professor Sogolo and others who were students at the time will be able to attest. But again, going back to the materials available, remember the demonstrations that usually followed the arrest of the likes of Taisho Lani or the likes of Wole Soyinka, or the killing of students in the course of peaceful protests, and the attempts to commemorate those killings, and which resulted in even more killings by the military authorities. So this was the broad framework within which the higher education system was evolving, and within it also the dynamic of academic and intellectual freedom. But if we thought we had seen the worst in the 1970s, even worse was to come in the course of the 1980s. And this was basically signaled by the onset of economic crisis across the continent for most countries from 1980 onwards, following the second OPEC oil price revolution, and the austerity measures that were adopted, both homegrown and later on externally imposed in the form of structural adjustment programs that adversely affected not only the broad population, but also the university system as a whole. And from the point of view of the exercise of academic freedom, we witnessed the collapse of public funding to universities, and it has basically been a downward spiral in the period since the 1980s onwards to this day. We saw, as a consequence also, the collapse of various aspects of campus life, both the civic culture that defined campus life, but also the basic public health components of student accommodation and feeding. The decline of our library systems was also a universal phenomenon across the African continent. So much so that, again, some of you will recall the World Bank at a point in response to criticisms of its policies, and partly to assuage the feelings of the academy, suggested that it was going to give loans to our countries to introduce a textbook project by which they would get money from the World Bank to import books to the libraries that were collapsing in the face of foreign exchange shortages. Of course, that itself became an issue of contestation insofar as the World Bank took it upon itself to prescribe which books were going to be financed by the loans that were offered to African countries. And I do recall that in the Nigerian context, this was roundly rejected by the Academic Staff Union of Universities. There's also, of course, the collapse of the seminar culture, which constituted the life wire of the African university system, and in its place, the rise of a culture of consultancy, consultancy that eventually overcame the very essence of the university as a site of learning discussion and debate, and the kinds of epistemic communities built around the culture. Overall, we saw in the course of the 80s into the 90s an acceleration of the commodification of education, battles that were fought over the conditions for access to higher education, very familiar to us in the Nigerian context, a process of massification that saw admissions expanded massively into the public universities without a corresponding investment in the infrastructure to accommodate the many students who the explosion in student numbers that we began to witness. And of course, it was not uncommon, unusual to find that in a lot of cases, the connection between staff, academic staff, and their students became frayed in the context of massification. It was also a season of brain drain on a massive scale, alongside, interestingly, a reduced mobility. That was also the period, particularly for Francophone Africa. It was already experienced in Nigeria and Ghana, maybe perhaps Uganda also. But for the Francophone countries of Africa, the 1994 devaluation of the CFA franc and its implications in terms of mobility. For the first time, the Francophone university scholar was required to get a visa in order to go to France, which was for them an earth-changing, an earth-shaking development that for many meant an exit from the university system. And for those that remained, a feeling of being severely devalued. But this devaluation of the academic was also one which was commonplace in the face of the collapse of the incentive system for the average African academic. And security and safety became increasingly imperiled as we saw the rise of campus cults, as well as an epidemic of sexual abuse. And I would add here also the emergence of a culture of managerialism in higher education in Africa, in which quite explicitly, for example, in South Africa, the manuals that were developed in the 1990s basically defined the student in terms of a customer and the academic as a service provider. And the system of evaluation and rewards in that system was recalibrated in order to reflect that customer-client service provider relationship, emptying the academy further of the kind of vigor that is normally associated with a higher education system that is functioning and alive. Of course, all of these adverse developments took their toll in a very negative way on our universities, and some of that continues to this day, as I mentioned earlier on. But it's also remarkable, I would say, that the university remained more or less a site of resistance in a lot of cases. It was difficult to find a university that was in complete acquiescence with the changes in the context of higher education and the content of university life across the continent. Resistance was open in a lot of cases in the form of strikes and stayaways of various kinds. And even where it was not open, there were many silent forms of resistance, which invariably invited even more state-sponsored repression. Perhaps what was also new in that context was the tension that developed, particularly in situations of prolonged strike action between academics on the one hand, calling for better conditions and an improved environment of learning through more funding for higher education, and the students who saw themselves in some cases as victims of prolonged strike actions, or of parents who also felt penalized in some cases. It's a story which is very familiar to us in Nigeria, but certainly not limited to our context. And as the cults grew in strength and influence on campus, we've had cases of direct attacks on academics by student cults for a variety of reasons, including people insisting that they must be made to graduate even if they have not met the minimum requirements for doing so. Tensions, of course, also between academic staff and non-academic staff of many of our universities across the continent became a fairly regular feature of the higher education sector in the 1990s leading into the new millennium. In that context, it's, I think, interesting that CODESRIA, where I worked, although I was not there at the time, decided to organize an academic freedom conference in 1990 in Kampala, a conference which took place in October of that year, and followed on an earlier conference that was organized, interestingly, by the University of Dar es Salaam Staff Association, Academic Staff Association, the equivalent of our ASU, known as UDASA. And UDASA decided to organize that conference against the background of everything which I discussed earlier on, to address the deteriorating condition of work, not only on campus, but also the increased restrictions that were imposed on academics of that university. And they came out with what they called the Dar es Salaam Declaration on Academic Freedom of April 1990. CODESRIA, when it convened its meeting, moved the discussion beyond the confines of a single university to the continent as a whole, bringing scholars from all parts of the African continent to Kampala over a 3-day period to deliberate, compare notes, and also exchange views on experiences of the degradation of academic and intellectual freedom, and ultimately passed a declaration that has been fairly influential, one of a few of such declarations actually on a global scale. The other, which is fairly well known, being the Lima Declaration of 1988, I believe, 1988 Lima Declaration, that was sponsored by the World University Services, an organization, World University Service organization that was set up a few years earlier, and which was increasingly concerned about the erosion of freedom and autonomy of higher institutions of higher education around the world, particularly in Latin America. UNESCO, of course, also was to draw inspiration from these various convenings to also develop guidelines of its own on the freedom of science and of scientists. I think it's remarkable that if you look at the Kampala Declaration of 1990 and put it against the various points that I have covered around issues of the right of scholars to develop curriculum and to adopt methodology without being compelled either by an external authority, usually the state, the Ministry of Education, to follow a particular method or teach according to a particular curriculum, whether imported or locally homegrown, of the freedom of association on campus, of the autonomy of the university community as a prerequisite for its aspirations for excellence, and even around questions of the freedom to also comment on what goes on in the environment outside of the university system. And most importantly, the funding of higher education. You'll find that these issues are covered chapter by chapter, section by section in the Kampala Declaration of 1990, making it thereby, I think, one of the most comprehensive documents that emerged in that period, addressing particularly the African context of higher education. It's important, I think, also to recall that the Kampala Declaration put a lot of emphasis on the intellectual in a bid to go beyond the narrow confines of the university. It was a debate that took place among participants in Kampala between those who wanted the declaration to focus primarily on the academy itself and to concern itself exclusively with what concerns the African academic embedded working in a university system in Africa, as opposed to intellectuals in the broader sense of it, whether within the university or outside of the university. In the end, what was adopted was a declaration that accommodated the concerns of the academic, but also opened up to the broader intellectual community. There was also a second area of debate and discussion, which was whether it made sense at all to speak about the freedom of the academy or the intellectual without also paying attention to the corresponding responsibilities that the academy, the higher education system, the university, and the intellectual have towards society. And that also explains why a small section of the Kampala Declaration was devoted to the responsibility of the African intellectual. It's been 35 years since the Kampala Declaration, since the Dar es Salaam Declaration of April and the Kampala Declaration of October 1990. And both Albert and I were participants in a conference last week that took place in Dar es Salaam to revisit the Kampala Declaration.
Prof, you need to round up.
Yeah,
Prof.
I'm rounding up now. Yeah,
okay.
I'm rounding up.
Thank you.
In another 5 minutes, I'll be. We participated in this conversation to revisit the Kampala Declaration, and on the back of it also the UDASA Dar es Salaam Declaration. And basically most of the points that were covered in the Kampala Declaration continue to be valid around questions of underfunding, of massification of a poor incentive system, of collapsed infrastructures, of the decline of associational life, cultism, and so on and so forth, even attacks on unionization, including the unions of academics, but also in a lot of cases, the hijacking of students' unions that used to be a vibrant part of the university culture. But what was noted as completely new in terms of the struggle for academic freedom is the emergence of the private university. At the time the Kampala Declaration was adopted in 1990, there were probably not more than a 1% of universities that could be described as private, usually owned by religious organizations. But even in that case, brought under state regulation. What we have seen in the period since 1990, since the Kampala Declaration, has been an explosion in the numbers of private universities of various kinds and the restrictions that these universities impose on students and academics that impinge directly on the enjoyment of academic freedom. And this in the context of a shrinking civic space in many of our countries, of a decline in the civic culture that we have also witnessed at a time also when the global order is undergoing tremendous change of a kind which in many respects, as we have seen, for example, in Gaza and elsewhere, has translated into direct attacks on dissenting voices that usually come out of the academy, and therefore makes it important that we revive our interest and commitment in advancing, defending academic freedom, but doing so as part of a broader struggle to defend the rights and freedoms of the populace in a context which, at least pro forma, is said to be democratic. So let me stop there and thank you for your kind attention and indulgence.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we were rightly told by the president that it was going to be stimulating, and I think it has been. Thank you very much. It has been clear. We have all followed. Thank you for reminding me of the 70s and the 80s about what happened at that time. You know, I can still remember Kunle Adekpoju, the student who was killed during a protest, killed by the police during a protest in UI. And, you know, the year during the Shagari regime, when, you know, some lecturers were dismissed summarily. I can still remember Onimode, Bala Usman, and others, Bala Usman for ABU, Onimode, Onoge. They were all just thrown off from their jobs. And then the IBB time, when we were told that we were not teaching what we were paid to teach. And that was harassment. So it really happened a lot during our time. We thank you very much for this very brilliant presentation. I'm not seeing any hands up now. I think we now give members the opportunity to either comment or ask questions. I don't know, from my own end here, I'm not seeing any hands. Professor Albert, are you seeing any?
None, sir.
So Shudari is raising his hand.
Okay, can you call him, because I'm not seeing?
Not electronically.
Okay, call him. Let's call him. Professor Shudari, please. Can you make your comment if you are hearing me? Yes, I'm seeing him now. Thank you very much. Can you make your comment, please? Professor Shudari, you are muted.
You are muted, sir.
Shudari, you are muted. We're not hearing you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Olukoshi for this very, very exciting and also topical talk you've given. It's good to see you. I've heard and read so much about you. It's good to see you today. Now, I'm looking at, as I usually do, the Faculty of Connections and Connectedness. The global situation, as we have it today, it looks like the world is moving right. And it's not possible for that to happen without this affecting the academic. Every fascist, every despot, we all know this. The first thing you do is you seize the radio or whatever, if it's a coup, or decrease, really clamping down on freedom of speech. And by the time we begin to see that, we also know that the universities will not be far behind. Why? Authoritarian rulers talk about one God, one nation, one destiny, and so on. But they also talk about one opinion, one voice, one way of looking at the world. So whatever is different from that, something that should be removed.
That's interesting.
University, sorry, can you hear me?
Go on. Yes, we can.
Yes, very briefly. I raised an issue about 20 years ago at the University of the way the nomenclature of university administration had changed. All of a sudden, people were saying university management, so management. Students were being called end user, and people they are the end users, so on. The corporatization of academia itself. It wasn't just a change of nomenclature, it was also a change of practice and even a change of theory. So, and I remember in the 1960s and 1970s when we were students, we talked about university administration. The Vice Chancellor was seen as primus inter pares, first among equals. Now, the hierarchicalization that comes with corporatization makes the Vice Chancellor more or less a chief executive. The American, I think there is something really American about that change of name. But that change of name is also very, very important. The university autonomy, academic freedom, university autonomy. Pre-1980 was when ASU really began as ASU. That is in our country, Nigeria. I was there when different parameters had to be laid out, things had to change, and so on. And then when we were working on university, the payment structure for university teachers, I know that Nigeria's federal administrators, particularly the permanent secretaries, were always looking at how much is the professor going to earn now? What about it? Then at a point they raised the issue. If you want university freedom, if you want university autonomy, then how are you going? Whoever pays the piper must dictate the tune. You cannot be independent if you depend on the funding of government. So whatever government says, you have to. It took quite a long time, but we were able to secure something. I'm coming to the end now, generally. I'm really looking at the way we who are workers in the vineyard, in the universities, particularly in our country, Nigeria, the way we as internal operators of the system have actually violated the system. How does the Nigerian university professor or university teacher see himself or herself in relation to authority? What happens when the university campus becomes more or less unsustainable, and most of our people are moving out to work with the people who don't really see any reason why there should be autonomy in the university. Finally, appointment of vice chancellors. We fought and fought about this. I remember the federal government didn't want it to happen. You know, at that time, vice chancellors were being transferred. Took somebody from ABU, put him at the University of Ife, and so on. It wasn't good because government wanted that, but we fought. Where we won it, there must be search committee, there must be an interview and so on, how to present this and so on. We agreed. The problem now is we are sabotaging our success from inside. It makes me really unhappy when I see our people, the way our people appoint vice chancellors. Recently, somebody who was not really a professor was really pushed into the position and started calling himself professor. In the end, there was a crisis in the university, and the government who wanted to really decrease our independence was the one that we had to run to. It was the same government that now said, no, I'm canceling that. You people go back and do this. Something is wrong with the way we manage the internal system itself. I think we have to really begin by looking at ourselves. We that are workers in the vineyard, what is our relationship to the knowledge that we are supposed to disseminate? What about that freedom? What that autonomy? Do we really know what it means? This really is. And then finally, oh my God, the proliferation of universities and the proliferation of university ownerships. You go to many of the private universities, you are amazed. You know, sign before you go, sign when you come in, do this, do that. And that is not the idea of the university that we used to know. So a lot is happening. Thank you very much for bringing this to the limelight. It's as if the battle we fought in the 1970s and 1980s and up to the first half of the 1990s is as if those battles never really happened. University autonomy really needs, and academic freedom plus intellectual freedom. We need to be recategorized, re-theorized, and a different parameter of practice we have to be introduced. Thank you very much, Professor Olukoshi. Bless you, and bless NAL.
Thank you, our great professor. Thank you very much. I really want to ask a question. I don't know whether the Professor Olukoshi can add to that. In addition to what Professor Shindari just said, I want to ask if indeed our union, the ASU, for instance, is emphasizing this aspect of our challenge, i.e., you know, the repressive step to curb academic freedom. Whether ASU is really addressing that as much as addressing the financial aspects. It's you know, I would have said Professor Shindari should really, I don't know if you can, because you're talking about the old experience, yeah.
Oh, yes. Each time we talked, especially when the military people were there, the response we got was, you cannot be independent intellectually, academically, and so on, if we are not independent economically. It has some sense. But what we usually told them is, no, the money you have, the resources of the country do not belong to the soldiers, do not belong to the rulers. They belong to the people of Nigeria. And then they told us that was an academic argument. I don't think it's really an academic argument, but it has a very important core to it. Because again, whoever pays the piper dictates the tune. That's why government, I'm closing down the university. Look at what the mess that Babangida made of us. Close down the university, and then traditional rulers will go there to beg him and so on, and then you will come out like a king and say, okay, I'm reopening. Now you have to give a guarantee that you people will not misbehave. What they used to do was to seize the salary, and that would be it. So independence, autonomy, how can that be? When Chief Obasanjo was there, I still remember him telling us, yeah, you can apply for grant. You know, grant from European countries, grant from America and so on. And something actually went around, people went around teaching people how to write, how to compose grant statements and grant applications. Nearly became routine. Said, what kind of slavery is this? So funding is very, very important. We can't leave it to the rulers who control the purse that, oh yeah, they will do it as a matter of good-naturedness. No, every ruler wants to use what he has to get what he doesn't have and wants to have. It's the same thing with the private universities. This is my university. If you like what I'm doing, fine. If you don't, then you can go. And then you say, what about what Newman said about the idea of the university? He will look at you and say, that was Newman. You know, go and build your own university and rule it the way you like. So we need a lot. ASU has been doing a lot of work as far as this is concerned. I hope you remember 1973, when the young military dictator, General Gowon, said, go back or quit. 1973, I will never forget. And then university teachers discovered that they had nowhere to go. They had no houses, they had nothing. Their strike collapsed. And we didn't have an organization until 1980, when our great friend Biodun Ifo and others came around. That was how ASU began. And I remember I was, and I still consider myself, I'm very, very much involved with this. What we kept on saying is to remind the people of Nigeria that the educational system of the country belongs to them, not to rulers who just come and go. It takes public education for people to be able to do that. We are not as independent, as autonomous now as we were in the past, and it's affecting the quality of education. But as I said, we who work in the university system should actually be ready to defend our honor. The way we lose people to the public service itself, you know, because it's like everybody is trying to see what they can do to get out.
Thank you, Prof. Any other contributor?
Yeah, Professor Badejo raised his hand, actually.
Yes, okay. Professor Badejo.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me thank Professor Olukoshi for his brilliant presentation, and join Professor Shundare in there was something he kept saying. He who pays the piper dictates the tune, and that's exactly what has happened and what continues to happen in the public universities. I'm happy that Professor the presenter went beyond Nigeria to contextualize our situation. The problem with us is that if you are talking of change, what has happened is that the glorious days in which intellectuals in Nigeria fought to get autonomy for the universities and set the academia free to express whatever opinion they have. This is changing. I remember 2 days ago, I got a notice from Nigeria about April salaries have not been paid because we have not got this from government and all that. In such a situation, how does the intellectual have the motive to continue to struggle for such a country in which he can barely survive? That is the zeal to fight for the survival of the nation is changing in the universities. Let's be frank. What the average intellectual within the system now has is, how can I survive? It's not a question of autonomy again. It is sad, but that is where we find ourselves. And unfortunately, the private universities are even a greater obstacle to fight, because they are the extreme of this. The piper dictates the tune, because he says he who pays the piper dictates the tune. They have their strict rules. You either comply or you get out. So where does the intellectual go? In the public university, he is under pressure. In the private universities, a different form of pressure is coming. So when I look at the situation, I just I shake my head and say, how do we go forward? And all these intellectual discussions that we have about the situation, what the country can gain from having this autonomy in the universities, the society itself does not appreciate it. What the average Nigerian parent wants is, let my own child graduate first. After that, you can discuss whatever. But so they don't see the importance of this autonomy. But I just wish that those who are still very active within the system will not give up, but will continue, because change is the only constant in life. And so eventually we could still go back to the good old days when the academic was respected within society, and therefore whatever views they were enunciating at the time were respected. I'm still positive that this will happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Badejo. There's a hand up, but simply iPhone. I don't know who. iPhone. Yeah, please.
Yes, Prof.
Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or is it evening in Nigeria? I'm away in China
Good
now.
evening.
Yeah, this is Professor Rafindati Ali Rafindati Sanusi.
Okay.
Of Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Yeah, I wanted to thank you very much and the presenter for bringing these dimensions to the issues relating to the degeneration and gradual loss of academic freedom in the academy. I like the way that is related to, the democratization of the appointments of vice chancellors and other officers in the academy, and how we have abused it over time. I see that abuse of the democratization as now the most important factor in the driving the erosion of this academic freedom. I'll give you an example. You see, at the lowest level, departments and faculties, leaders are elected. Let me use the word elected. At the departmental level, it's supposed to be consultation. But in many universities, they outright put it to election. But I think the rule says clearly that at the deanery, it should be election. So elections do happen. And one problem with election is politicization and emergence of groupings within the academic unit. So where the search for the truth, the academic research, agenda setting is supposed to happen, you have politics now emerging and dominating everything, including the direction we take. So that in itself has affected the thinking process itself, where, for instance, in, say, WhatsApp platform, social media platform, where academics do discuss issues, people cannot express their views as freely as is required, as is allowed by academic freedom, for fear of, offending one side or the other of the political divide, because they do happen. At the highest level, where vice chancellors are appointed, we have seen how people from the academia have degenerated to seeking the support of the politicians. So as if you're a council member or chair of a council, you keep receiving calls from politicians, pointing to one or two, preferred candidate. They don't come by themselves. The point I'm trying to say is that this politicization and its abuse is taking a dimension that I think we need to do something about it. So much that the way we think as academics have started to, instead of, guiding the society, we're now copying from the degenerated system of the society, calling on politicians to come and put pressure on the council chair and members to elect one that is incompetent, not right for the university as vice chancellor. So it's terrible. What happens? So in majority of the universities, people who have no business being anywhere close to the university are now leading the universities. Remember, sir, in that 90s, early 90s and late 80s, because of SAP and the problem with the economy, the stagnation of the salaries, many people left the university. So graduates with first class who were supposed to stay in the system and be lecturers left the universities. And over time, only those who had nowhere else to go really stayed and got employed in the university because of the pay. So the best went to the banks and so on and so forth. So these are the categories of employees that have now grown to be professors and are helter-skelter going around looking for positions. So they draw on the politicians and get appointed. And where they succeeded, they take orders, let me use the word, orders from the politicians, instead of telling, them, resisting things that violate academic freedom or autonomy of the university. They just take it as if it is an order and they implement it. Sometimes they go and lobby from the politicians. As a result, we have reached a level where a minister writes and signs a letter directly to the vice chancellors, not through a director in the ministry, not through the NUC, and not through the relevant organs, directly. I think that is abnormal. And the vice chancellors, in fact, on matters that relate to the mandate of the Senate, and instead of taking those issues to the Senate to deliberate and either ratify or what, they go straight to implementation. I have seen this a number of times, and I pitied the future of the academy, honestly, if we are to go this way. And there's another dimension also that is, and I like the issue that is brought relating to funding. And I like Prof's argument that their claim that he who pays dictates the tune is flawed and is not true. I like that. Part of the reason is, in the context of Nigeria, for instance, so long as we don't look at education as being the responsibility of government, and that failing to fund education would make 90% of Nigerians have no access to higher education, because the poverty rate in some states is up to 92%. Forget the political figures. The truth we all know is that in some states, poverty rate can be up to 90%, and majority from 60% up. So how do we expect those children of the poor to get to universities if it is not funded? So paying the piper, dictating the tunes means we give you money, but you can't run a university. You're going to run a secondary school. We dictate what you say, what you... that defeats the entire purpose of a university education. We can't produce thinkers. So I like the discussion, and it raises a painful emotion in me, because I see the future if nothing is done, and I don't see anything serious being done to reassert this autonomy, especially financial autonomy and academic freedom, because of the politicization, abuse of the politicization. I will tell you, sir, something that is happening in most of these universities. Appointed HOD or Dean, they embark on employing people who have no business being in the academia, but for the purpose of creating a dynasty, kind of political. So they see this employment as opportunity to increase the number of votes. ASU has to do something about this. ASU has to do something about this. So thank you very much. So much to say, and I know there is no time, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Professor Golo Silonla was muted.
Sorry. I saw the hands of Professor Mejulu. Can you please make your contribution? After that, we allowed Professor Olukoshi to respond.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's been a wonderful evening, and I want to thank Professor Olukoshi for the wonderful presentation. Just one aspect that I want to call our attention to, and that is the issue of the National Universities Commission. We are talking about academic and intellectual freedom of our universities. I believe that NUC is very important in helping to maintain standards, and especially in holding universities accountable for what they have opted to do. But a situation in which the NUC is now dictating programs, benchmarks, and so on, and making our Nigerian university system a monotony, whereby every university is doing practically the same thing. My question to Professor Olukoshi is this ideal? Is this the best way of promoting academic and intellectual freedom? Are we not actually now undermining academic and intellectual freedom through the outsourcing of academic and intellectual development completely to the National Universities Commission. I think that the beautiful idea of the NUC has now also become a source of threat to the university system. I want you to comment on that. Thank you very much.
Good point.
Yes, Professor Olukoshi, can you respond?
Can I
to some
just
of the
throw in,
points?
Professor Sugolo?
Yes.
Can I just throw in just one or two brief
Please do.
comments here before I hand it over to? I don't know whether it's a comment or question. Yes, sir. Professor Shindare was referring to the corporatization of the system, but I was looking at it more in terms of some internal contradictions in the system itself and a drift towards autocracy within our system, which is reflected both at the level of the administration and of the staff. When the vice chancellor calls himself VC CEO, and I've seen quite a number of I've seen quite a number of my colleagues when I was VC who described themselves as vice chancellor / chief executive officer.
Chief executive.
And they printed their complimentary cards with those titles embossed in it. And for me, it's a kind of sense of inadequacy of who you are or what you are, because the vice chancellor is the head of the institution. You don't need to call yourself chief executive officer for people to recognize you as one.
No.
But it wasn't just one person or two that did that. I saw quite a few of my colleagues at that time. And that trend is still existing even now. But even at the level of the staff ourselves, the Nigerian university system does not operate the American system of assistant professor, associate professor, and professor. We operate lecturer 2, lecturer 1, senior lecturer, reader, and professor. Now, the reader is actually, technically, the associate professor. But I've seen our colleagues describing themselves as associate professor. They are actually pronounced reader by their universities, but they prefer to use the title and they put it as like a title. So for me, it's a sense of inadequacy at who we are relative to the larger community, trying to prove that we are bigger than what things we are. And I don't know who we are competing with. I don't know who we are competing against. And maybe we need to begin to ask ourselves, what are the values that drive us in coming to this profession in the first instance? Why am I vice chancellor? Why am I the dean? Why am I the head of the university? What is driving me? And then when you make somebody a reader and he ends up calling himself associate professor Michael, so, it's nauseating. That is just one. Maybe I don't know whether I'm the one who is. Then the second issue is the question of the autonomy, the financial autonomy. And I had a meeting today with another council, with a council of a university, in which we are talking about enhancing and growing their revenue in the university. And I was looking at the implications of ultra dependence on government for internal autonomy in the system. And I recall my experience when we're talking about autonomy in the university. And my governor told me, said, VC, academic autonomy you have. You can do what you like with your teaching, your research, but financial autonomy, you have to come to me. And it was brazen. It was an open meeting. There was a retreat for chief executives of state agencies, all the executive secretaries, permanent secretaries, GM. So the vice chancellor and provosts and rectors of colleges were also there. And I was raising issue about allowing the universities to run on values that we are used to. And openly he said, on your academic matters, you have autonomy. When it comes to money, you have to come to me. And everybody laughed. But I was alarmed because it's a signal that what we call autonomy is circumscribed by our ability to fund ourselves. And I was happy the time I had to deal with another government that placed an embargo on our funds for almost 18 months, that refused to pay our salaries for 9 months. And the university was running throughout. And we were able to pay salaries on time, did everything on time. So they came to me at that time. But it was because we had reserves and we had some form of internal management to generate our own funds. But if you cannot do it, it actually circumscribes our ability to resist or to stand for what we believe in. So I don't know whether it's a question or anything, but I know that the issue of the ability of the institution to generate funds, and unfortunately, SARS, when we talk about raising the tuition or anything, the government says no. So they constrain us from raising funds and they refuse to give us the funds that we need to run. So how do we navigate that? Even when we are ready to take the bold step to charge or to raise some form of meaningful income through tuition and other things, the same government lacks the courage to pursue it, the political courage to pursue that agenda. It's a problem that I don't know how we are going to get out of it. Sorry, the third issue is on NUC and curriculum development. And I'm reluctant to raise this issue, but I've said it once and again. We keep blaming the NUC for the kind of curriculum we are running in the university system. The NUC will tell us correctly that the curriculum is developed by experts within our universities, that they don't curriculum experts in the NUC, that they invite operators from our system to develop the curriculum, so that if we have any problem with it, we should go to our colleagues that help them to do it. And this is a fundamental question, because NUC does not have the expertise. They rely on our university, our colleagues who get paid to go and write junks for us. Because when I looked at the syllabus of some of the courses, I was wondering, in which century are we living? If my students at that time could tell us that they found some things more exciting on Google than we are teaching them in the class, where are we? Because even the information available online, I wonder whether we need the universities anymore. So these are issues we need to ask ourselves. How much have we contributed to taking away our own ability to run the university?
That's right.
As we ought to. And talk about the political appointments, vice chancellors, candidates for vice chancellor taking a seat in Abuja until the appointment is made, and sitting down in Abuja and running from one office to the other. Then how do you become free when you get to the office? So these are some of the issues that there are internal contradictions within the system that makes us susceptible to being hammered from outside. Maybe keep quiet. Maybe Professor Olukoshi can help us.
Thank you, President. Before Professor Olukoshi comments, there's a question on online by Professor Adebayo. What is the way forward, and what recommendations do we have? What is the way forward, and what recommendations do we have? Professor Olukoshi, I hope it's in the house.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you respond to?
Yes, thank you very much indeed for this very rich discussion. A lot of it in the form of comments elaborating particularly on the Nigerian context and experience. and I concur with the analysis that has been provided. Professor Shundari, thank you very, very much indeed. You know, as I listened to you and the other colleagues, it seemed to me that one of the things we need to pay closer attention to is the correlation that exists between adverse trends in society as a whole and what happens in the university system. Interconnection. Because when you come to think of it, I mean, 2 days ago, somebody was distributing your poem on the judiciary. You can remove the judiciary and put the academy there.
How should we take your bribe?
Yes.
Yeah, you can remove the academy and put the National Assembly there. So that we have a system, a process in which actually in the end, our struggle for academic freedom has to be understood as part of a broader struggle for a better society, and not as an end in itself and confined. We cannot be an oasis of sanity in a context of total degradation and failure. One way or the other, sooner or later, what goes wrong in the wider system will certainly find its way and get refracted into the academy. And I think perhaps I would agree that over the years, based on my own experience when I was in the country, but also in interaction with colleagues who have been in the leadership of ASU, there is a lot to be celebrated in terms of the courage and even vision of successive generations of ASU leaders. We might, of course, quarrel over issues of tactics, over maybe sometimes timing and sequencing of particular actions that are taken. But on the whole, I think it has been something of pride for me personally as a Nigerian, that we had an ASU that has remained solid on the whole and avoided even some of the worst forms of division, which we have seen in the traditional trade union movement in the country. But that said, it would be important also to pay attention to the nuances of what might be shifting in our context. And it's true that in terms of the governance of the university itself, something which is supposed to be within our full, relatively full control. In Nigeria as elsewhere on the continent, this managerialism, this corporatization, has had such a detrimental effect on the capacity of the academic to function in the way in which a normal academic should function, to a point where I think Rafindadi also alluded to it. A colleague in Dar es Salaam, for example, was saying to us that the University of Dar es Salaam, celebrated as the home of the Dar es Salaam School for those in the social sciences, has become a center of praise and worship. And I asked him, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, all we do when we gather is basically like a praise and worship session. You start, the Vice Chancellor begins by worshiping the President of the Republic and the Minister of Higher Education. And then the deans gather together and worship the Vice Chancellor. And every other person is expected to toe the line. So it's basically, you don't have the spirit of debate, of contention, of what makes for the vibrancy of And out of that kind of environment, you can never really generate schools of thought, things that affect us as a people. We are not able to be original and creative in producing the theories and the frames of understanding. And in the end, what we have is an exercise in mimicry in a lot of cases. Just basically copycat. If it's not Google, then it's some old professor somewhere who came on an academic tourist visit to the continent and writes an impression, is popularized, and then everybody begins to quote as the authority about ourselves and our circumstances. And that is why, in a sense, autonomy, regardless of who pays the bill for the universities, ought to be defended as a public good and not a privilege. Any enlightened ruling class that has a broader vision of the public purpose in mind, as opposed to a parochial understanding of power, would in fact cherish and support autonomy for the progress and advancement of society. It's perhaps a little too much to ask of our own ruling class in Nigeria, and perhaps in many places on the continent. But I know that also in some parts of our continent, resistance takes place when there is an attempt by the government as the one paying the bills to infringe on the autonomy of the university. I'll give the example of the University of South Africa, UNISA, which some of you may be familiar with. The Minister of Higher Education decided to appoint a sole administrator for the university and issued a directive to that effect in public. And both the Vice Chancellor and the University Council took the minister to court to challenge his authority and power. They wanted to know on what authority he was doing it without the agreement of council, and what powers constitutionally he had to appoint a sole administrator for the university. It was a long-drawn battle, but in the end, the university won the battle. The Vice Chancellor remains in place. In fact, has been given a second term by council. And the council itself was able to reassert and reaffirm its authority as the apex governing body for the University of South Africa. And it has had implications for the rest of the university system. I think that it's important that we also keep that culture of resistance and struggle alive. And I hear the colleague who said, you know, people have been so beaten into a situation of poverty, even at the professorial level, that the appetite to fight any fight has simply dissipated. And people are preoccupied with basically making ends meet. And it's true, multiple modes of livelihood, being involved in, you know, sometimes teaching in 3 universities, full-time and part-time, combined with consultancy and moonlighting, and all of it takes something away from the essence of being a scholar who is paid enough to be able to have a concentrated attention to the business of producing knowledge and generating ideas for societal development. It seems to me, though, that in the end, we also, as ASU, if it will not come from university administration, need to begin to address questions of the building of endowments for our universities. Endowments which, again, to use the South African context, even if government decided, and Harvard is a good example today also, But in South Africa, Wits University, where I am, even if the government decided that it was not going to give the university its annual subvention of something like 600 million rands, the university's endowment is in the region of 15 billion rands, which it can draw in order to continue to function effectively. The capacity of Harvard University's leadership to say to the Trump administration, go and jump, is also partly because it is one of the best endowed universities in the world today. I think it's elements of this kind that our union leadership can begin to push towards and encourage some of the patriotic-minded rich Nigerians to pay into the endowment. It's a bit of a shame that sometimes our rich Africans prefer to go build structures in Oxford and Cambridge and endow chairs at King's College or SOAS and similar such places. But I'm also happy that a few of them are also beginning to be open to the idea of helping, especially with infrastructure, faculty buildings or center buildings on our campuses, and they can be pushed a bit more as part of the growth of a philanthropic sector in our countries to invest in higher education as something which is in their own interest ultimately, and not simply an act of charity. Those will be my very quick reactions. Yeah, the question of NUC, I was embarrassed actually when I heard that NUC, the NUC has recently been in the business of supplying curriculum to universities. It was actually at the Dar es Salaam conference of last week that one of the colleagues from Nigeria made reference to that unfortunate development. And I think every pressure should be put on the NUC to step back from that retrogressive approach which it has adopted. The curriculum is a very dynamic instrument of pedagogy and attempting to impose a rigid framework on the universities. And I hear you, Professor Akinade, where you said that it's our own colleagues who go to NUC to write those curricula, but also for the same reason that when people are offered a fee in a context of generalized poverty to come write something.
They will write anything.
Yeah, the temptation to accept it is very high in the environment in which we are today. NUC has no business even starting that initiative in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olukoshi. I think in a way you have answered the question, what is the way forward or what recommendations? You have covered everything. Professor Albert, I don't know what time we have left. Or President.
In charge, sir.
Yes.
You're in charge.
How is the time limit without limit? Okay,
well, yes,
we've exhausted our time really, but you can still do 3 or 4 minutes if you want.
But the topic is so interesting that we really should continue. I said there was I think the person on iPhone.
Daddy?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. You want to? All right. Go on.
Yeah. Just a word or two. I think this issue of NUC and curriculum, I think is exaggerated in a way. Let me make this point. You see, in the context of the proliferation of private universities, there has to be a way of ensuring that that a minimum standard is maintained. And in that context, I have seen how over time, allowing Senate to develop the curriculum would have led to, a bad development in terms of quality. I'm not saying the recent attempt to change it from minimum academic benchmark to core curriculum is justified, but that I think more of our focus should be on maintaining the standard. I'll tell you something for free, sir. You see, most of these private universities that are getting licensed here and there almost for free by the day, in truth, they have no academic staff that are capable in reality of handling a university, the job. What they rely on, and they make a lot of lies. They put a lot of lies in the documents that they submit to the NUC. What they rely on are really visiting lecturers who hardly have time to go and actually do the teaching. And sometimes they have what they call borrowed lecturers, where they appoint people into positions such as professors, readers, without the intention of taking them on. So you could have somebody in a public university applying maybe as a lecturer 2, 3, lecturer 2, lecturer 1, senior, or even reader, applying to a private university to be given a professor. They would write him a letter indicating that they have taken him to be a professor, but with no intention of him reporting and taking the full position, just for the purpose of documentation. So where you have a senate of that university now given the traditional 100% mandate to develop curriculum, and then you are dealing with a society where 90% of the population cannot afford private education. Very few can. And those who cannot pass the minimum requirement of UTME. Then you have reduction in the minimum score, up to 120. I learned in some time. So you score 120 in JAMB and you get admission into a university.
Yeah, Prof, I think you should try to round up.
Yeah.
You should try to round up so we can get 1 or 2 more contributions.
So NUC has a huge role, and yes, sir. So I think yes.
Thank you. I saw Professor Atta. I don't know.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much, Prof.
Please. Yes.
So I just want to add to what the president said the other time concerning title chasing lecturers and even vice chancellors. I think between 2020, 2021, the idea or an idea was floated at the Vice Chancellor's committee meeting where some people advocated for First Lady. Is it VC for University First Lady to create an office for First Lady? Incidentally, Professor Oshebu was the secretary then. I found it ridiculous. And it's part of the challenges we are having. And relating the issue of, what is it called? The NUC. There is a huge problem. One, most of the many lecturers lobby to be included in the team to draw up the curricula, either they know how to do it or not. Because of the weaponization of poverty in the university system, which Professor Adebayo mentioned, referred to earlier. So there is an internal problem that will take time to resolve. And until we take care of the economic problem, this issue will continue to linger without solution. That is my submission, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think we can have one more comment. Prof. Emerita Abiola Odejide, Madam.
Yes,
long
you're
time.
right.
Nice seeing
Long
you.
time. Thank you. My question is about the impact of the involvement of university lecturers and professors in our electoral process. We just seen a case of one professor being sent to jail for helping to write election results for one of our senators. How does this co-optation of university lecturers into the electoral process impact on university autonomy? Thank you.
Okay. Professor Olukoshi, can you please answer the last, or whatever you want to say before I hand over to Professor Albert and then to the president to have his last word. Professor Olukoshi,
Thank
yes,
you.
please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to very briefly comment on Professor Rafindadi's observation with regard to the NUC and curriculum. And I completely agree with his diagnosis with regard to the ways in which a lot of private universities are cutting corners and therefore in that process severely eroding standards which are already in a very bad shape in many of our universities. But I think it's also possible to find alternative methods of addressing that problem, short of uniformizing curricula across the system.
Yes.
Universities cannot function on the basis of a uniform curriculum system. And we as a community actually did reject an attempt. Remember the World Bank in the 1980s suggested that we might, in teaching some of our courses, simply take the course outlines from places like Harvard and Oxford and apply them to our context. And we rejected it for very good reasons. You cannot develop curriculum out of context. Universities represent different streams of thinking around particular issues in science, and those approaches sometimes stand them out. If I go to the Chicago School of Economics or the Chicago School of Sociology, I know that I am going into quantitative sociology or quantitative economics. You cannot go through Chicago School of Economics if you are not into econometrics, if you don't have a solid background in mathematics. Now, if I choose to go to the new school, if I go to the new school in New York, I know that even if I go there with some interest in quantitative analysis, they are very strong in qualitative methods, and they put a lot of emphasis on qualitative analysis, and so on and so forth. So I think it's that variety that also makes it interesting from the point of view of students and parents, but also allows for debates that provide vibrancy in an epistemic community. With regard to Professor Emerita's question, I think even without the jailing of the Akwa Ibom professor, some of us have watched the ways in which, I think you might remember the returning officer for the Rivers State elections and all of the fumbling and confusion with figures and announcement of the results. I like an article which was written in the 1990s by Professor Jibrin Ibrahim, and he titled it "How Our Professors Gained the Politics and Lost the Science," published in the CODESRIA Bulletin in the 90s. And I think it's worth probably returning to it and seeing some of the difficulties involved in that process of co-optation and incorporation in domains in which we do not have the kind of specialization that is required to excel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Adebayo Olukoshi. We really have had a wonderful experience today. It's a privilege to have chaired this occasion. Thank you very much. And I want to thank Professor Albert again, and then the President for giving me this opportunity, because it's been a very rich experience. Thank you, Professor Albert.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I hand over to my president, let me once again thank Professor Sogolo for agreeing to actually chair today's meeting. It's an excellent experience. We also want to thank Professor Adebayo Olukoshi. He's a very busy man, and I've been chasing him around the world. And I'm happy that he's able to make it today. So, Professor, we thank you so much. We've stolen part of your time, but you've given back to the country what this country gave to you when you were produced by Ahmadu Bello University and when you worked for the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. So thank you so much. Now, before I hand over to my president, let me announce that the next in line for our dialogue series is going to be a roundtable discussion on the emerging security threats in the Sahel region, implications for Nigeria. And as Professor Sogolo said when we're starting today's meeting, I think this is another timely intervention, because the federal government is disturbed that foreign fighters are rushing into Nigeria, arms and ammunition rushing into Nigeria, and it's like we are starting the fight against terrorism. It's like we are starting it all over. So it would be nice to get some experts to really talk to us about some of these problems. And today we have discussed the future of our education. I think by the time we meet next, we'll be discussing the future of our national security. So, and is slated for the 22nd of May. So in the next 2-3 weeks, we'll be meeting again, but this is going to be a roundtable discussion. And our roundtable discussion consists of at least 3 speakers. And I pray we have the kind of robust discussion we've had this evening when we meet next. Now, let me hand over to Professor Shola Akiniade. And we really need to thank you, sir, the president, because when we suggested some of these names to you, we thought you would come up. Hello? So we thank you for accepting our recommendations. And here we are today. So let me hand over to you, sir.
Well, I don't have much to say, but to thank you and to thank the participants today. In particular, let me appreciate the foundation president, Professor Bangoshe, who has been online since we started, Professor Dan Izebayi. Of course, Professor Sogolo, who has competently chaired the meeting. Professor Adejide, thanks for finding the time. The vice president is also online, Professor Andrew Aruna. I know he's been busy for the past 3 days because we're in the same meeting today. I know that he was tempted to go and sleep, take a nap. If you dare take a nap, you won't wake up until tomorrow. So, and he has been online throughout. So let me appreciate you for staying awake to part of today's program. Like Professor Albert said, our next meeting is a panel. What he didn't tell you that he's one of the 3 panelists that day. Professor Albert, the former Chief of Army Staff, former Minister of Defense, Minister of Interior, Lieutenant General Damazao, and another friend that Bayo is familiar with, Cyril Obi, who is in New York. So they are the panelists that we have for the next meeting. And I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you'll be part of the session as well. Let me appreciate everybody. Professor Adebayo, I think I've seen you as well. Let me appreciate everybody and say, see you next time. Bayo, Professor Adebayo Olukoshi, I really appreciate your availability for this program, for giving us a very interesting session. And we look forward to you being part of our dialogue in future. Hope you can take the time to join us. Thank you very much. Professor Adebayo, I salute you. Thank you, sir. So, good night and see you next time. God bless.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, President.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Good night.
Associate Professor Akiniade.
Thank you all. Greeting from Namaskar University, Oka. This is BAC Obiefuna saying thank you to all of you.
Bye.
Very interesting evening. Thank you and good night.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
Like you know. Well, for beautiful now. How now?
I'm very loyal, very, very loyal.
You need a why?
Yeah.
What?
God willing. We'll keep on moving.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best too.
All right, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Tony Afejuku, are you there? Tony? Oh.
Evening, sir. Ododo here, sir. Professor Darren is gone.